Welcome to the Bureau podcast. And I have to say that my guest, Chris Meyer, and myself, we probably had a not very restful weekend because the people that have been following the Bureau know that Chris and I have been talking for over a year of the system in China and how Xi Jinping is strong and yet brittle. And so a major story broke over the weekend with Xi and whoever surrounds him in his power structure taking down the top PLA general. And so it's hard to state how important for the world this story is. Chris is the expert. He's a former U.S. government official. He's a sinologist. He knows China's political and criminal structure very deeply. And the Bureau's followers know. We've been talking about how Chris and I have been following from different areas how China, its generals, its crime proxies have been attacking the West. And at the same time, Xi himself perhaps has faced some coups in the past years, and something major happened over the past week. And so, Chris, let's jump into it. I'm going to be quiet. It's an exciting, it's a nervous time for experts on China. So, what is happening?
So, in the last 3 or 4 days, there's been a lot of activity in Beijing, and honestly, I am getting caught up to speed on it. It was a busy weekend for both of us, but what I did glean from the information over the weekend was that there was a CCP elite leaders hotel venue somewhere outside of in the outskirts of Beijing, and that Zhang Youxia, General Zhang Youxia, who has really been leading the charge against Xi Jinping, had a plan to arrest Xi at this location, and somebody who was aware of this informed Xi of this imminent operation, and there was an immediate effort to to counter that and arrest Zhang Youxia, and that was what happened. I did hear a report, I don't know how credible it is, that approximately 20 people, almost 50-50, half on the Xi side, half on the Zhang Youxia side, were killed during this altercation. It must have been quite an event. And also there were reports of very strange activity similar to this earlier, like a week, 10 days ago. So it's been smoldering, and I think there are notices for the people of Beijing to stay indoors because there's so much concern about security right now. It's such an unstable situation. But Zhang Youxia had led the charge, as I said, against Xi. There were some other people on the whiteboard behind me. Under his name, I think you have Liu Yan. Liu Yan was the first princeling, senior, well-credentialed princeling to come out with a written rebuke of Xi Jinping's rule. And then that was followed up. I think that was in November 2024. And that was followed up by a series of PLA articles, one a week in December following that were highly critical of Xi Jinping. And Zhang Youxia really led the charge. And he was urging so they're military, both of them are military people. And Zhang Youxia was urging the civil servant class, that felt the same way, to get involved. And some people were saying that these reformists that were kind of led by Hu Jintao, who was the former general secretary, they and Wen Jiabao, they were the kind of the senior leaders of the reformist faction. They were a little too timid to take the kind of action that was needed, like from late 2024 to this day. They have been sitting on the fence. The problem is that Xi Jinping has entrenched allies or supporters on the Politburo and in the Central Committee. He's been in power since 2012, and his people are all over the place. And they were the kind of the barriers to removing Xi. But I have to tell you, among people that are in China, the public, the general population is almost unanimously anti Xi Jinping, and this group, led by Zhang Youxia with the Hu Jintao faction, they were the ones that were carrying the ball to sort of make changes, and they were making progress. But unfortunately, um, circumstances went the other way, and now Zhang Youxia appears to be under house arrest, and there are reports that his entire family has been apprehended.
Right. So just to get people up to speed on, there's been, I think a good way to convey this is there's been org charts circulating, on social media over the weekend. And you have something like, you can correct me, 7 or something like that, top senior Chinese military officials that control the PLA, which is the party's army. It's not the army of China, it's the army of the Chinese Communist Party. And since Xi Jinping came in power, he installed, I believe, most, if not all, of these figures. And you look at those photos, picture Xi in the middle and 6 other people or 7, and there's X's through all but one. So he has taken out or purged the leadership of China's military or the party's military over the past few years, right?
When you say here, you're referring to Xi Jinping?
Xi Jinping, yeah.
So, okay, so this is my understanding is that, she reportedly had some kind of a health crisis, and some people call it a stroke. And it was something like July of 2024, somewhere in that period. And I understand from that health incident, that stroke, that it was pretty public, and there were reports of him, uh, not being very stable, walking after that, and all that. From that period on, the reformists were actively moving on Xi, and Zhang Youxia removed after that all of Xi's top people in the PLA. So the purges, I don't want to call them purges. I think it was removal of unfit unfit appointees by Xi Jinping. Xi was just putting loyalists in.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and by the way, this did not stop with the military. They also removed the top CCP appointee for Xinjiang and Hong Kong, who were Xi Jinping loyalists. They were removing people like that too. But in the military, Sam, all of Xi's appointees were removed. High-level appointees were removed. And they were removed by Zhang Youxia.
Oh.
And so reports are that most of the rank and file kind of agreed with this. So that the rank and file PLA soldiers are with Zhang Youxia. And I should point out, Zhang Youxia is one of the communist era. First of all, his father was very close with Xi Jinping. They were both important PLA assets. They had very important jobs. They were very successful, high profile, revered red royalty. And so their sons are princelings. Zhang Youxia, of all the princelings, had the military hero credentials. He's the only one who served in active duty. He was in war in Vietnam, wartime duty, and he was awarded for his valor and his accomplishments on the field. And he's pretty much the only person in the military who is a princeling who has that kind of stellar reputation. So picture a PLA that is completely in disarray because Xi Jinping is known to be a very poor governor, very poor leader. And Zhang Youxia is cleaning up his mess. So that's the way I see what happened in the PLA.
Would it be fair to say that, this general was perhaps the second most powerful person in China, or a potential rival to Xi that Xi was feeling threatened by?
Definitely. And here's an interesting little tidbit. Ever since Xi's health incident and Zhang Yusha stepped up and like I say, he's cleaning up the military. There were some leaders who were visiting China that insisted on meeting Zhang Yusha, like the new head of state from Vietnam visited, and he insisted on meeting Zhang Yusha. And that was what I think informed leaders who wanted a change. Like, keep in mind, Xi Jinping and this Yeshi clique that I've researched, they're responsible for this pig butchering. They're responsible for the Vancouver model. I believe they're responsible for the onslaught of synthetic drugs and money laundering with the cartels and all of the corporate capture and the influence and the United Front and the weaponization of the MSS. That is all Xi Jinping's bag of dirty tricks. And he's not smart enough to think of it, but it was given to him by the Yeshi clique. So the leaders that visit China understand they don't want this guy around either. So they're going to ask to meet with. They were asking to meet with Zhang Yusha. Unfortunately, the West just doesn't understand that. So Donald Trump negotiates with Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping is literally on the ropes. Donald Trump gives him lots of face and negotiates with the guy. And then Carney marches in and has this great new landmark agreement with Xi Jinping. And it's giving Xi Jinping face, and it's saying to the Chinese people, look, these leaders want to meet with him. He's obviously the guy. And unfortunately, it emboldened him and it allowed, I believe, Xi Jinping to pull off this reverse coup.
Right. Well, yeah. Okay. So let's jump in. The Mark Carney story is another story that's blowing up over the weekend. We have talked before about whether, in my view, Prime Minister Mark Carney was going to act for the Canadian people, or whether corporate interests, that tend to surround Liberal Party leaders and have been deeply involved in investments with Chinese communist, leaders and networks for decades, whether they would kind of press Mark Carney into deeper dealings. In my view, Mark Carney hasn't done a good job over the past few months, but let's look at the facts here. He announces a grand new strategic engagement with a regime that appears to have been on the brink of being overturned from within, and that's what seems to have emerged. Is that a fair way to look at? I mean, what's happening in China now to this day, like to this moment?
I mean, that is definitely the case. The timing was very good for Xi Jinping. It was very good for Xi Jinping because he got, the entire government of Canada waltzing into Beijing with all that pomp and circumstance. And by the way, Macron did the same thing, 2 weeks prior in Beijing. And then before that, Donald Trump did it. So what I'm saying is this conveyor belt of Western leaders gave Xi a lot of face when he really didn't have much face in China. I mean, there were reports that he had to get his travel cleared with Zhang Yusha.
So there's an alternative. There's an alternative reality where Donald Trump doesn't, allow TikTok to survive. Donald Trump doesn't, do this wrestling back and forth, with the tariffs, and just continues his hard line with China on trade. There's an alternative reality where Mark Carney says, we're going to, we may downgrade our deal on trade with the United States, but we would definitely not get in bed with Xi Jinping. And if those calls are made by Western leaders, Xi Jinping is on even more thin ice. That's the way you're looking at it?
Yeah. And Sam, what would have been, this is all dreamland, but what would have been nice to see would be the North American leaders getting on the same page.
Yeah.
and saying, just get some experts. Let you run the meeting. Let them see the Vancouver model and what it brought. and say, well, what are we gonna do about it? If that had been the approach, I'll tell you right now, we would be looking at a much different picture. I mean, the things could be undone. However, they're locked in now, and this is really part of Xi Jinping's bag of tricks. All this disinformation and all these influence operations and the United Front and organized crime, everything. It's really part and parcel of Xi Jinping. And what I want to point out, when you look at Hu Jintao and Wen Jiabao, they are the elders of the reformist faction. Hu Jintao was in power for 10 years in China, basically from 2000 to 2011. The economy of China never did better. The economy was on fire. The economy developed so much that Xi Jinping has been riding that for his last 10 years, because everyone really knows Xi is an economic, he's bamboozled by economics. So, the reformers were the ones that throughout the history of China, the reformers were always the ones that brought the economic relief. Liu Yan's father, Liu Shaoqi, was president of China in the early 60s, and he was cleaning up from Mao before Mao arrested him, started the Cultural Revolution, and tortured his father to death. So these are the people that run a good economy. These are the people that people like Kearney thinks he's dealing with. But unfortunately, he's dealing with the other headed dragon, the nasty guys who believe that covert ops and dual track strategies and everything nefarious is the way for China to undermine the West. So Kearney and Trump got what they asked for. Xi Jinping's
Right.
still in power.
So speaking of disinformation, I think it's important to maybe deconstruct or confirm, if it may be, a major story from the Wall Street Journal over the weekend, citing unidentified, military or party members, alleged that this general, John, was leaking the highest level of Chinese nuclear secrets to the CIA or the US government. And there's some people, some very credible experts online saying, hey, wait a minute, that story may not seem to add up. It, so you speak to that. I'll just say that, I mean, the reporters behind it, in a recent run of stories, including, the tense situation between Japan and China, uh, their reporting has been questioned by some China experts, as to the point that people are suggesting, well, the Wall Street Journal reporting could be seen as favorable to Beijing's propaganda, if it isn't stood up with very well known, sources.
Yeah. So this is a problem that I want to talk about in a broader context too. When a reporter in a major media outlet takes a package story like that and just prints it, I wonder what kind of influence is being wielded on the Chinese side to get that to happen. Because you can speak to this. I mean, reporters go through a lot of due diligence before they just report a story. And this one in particular, the fact that Zhang Youxia is passing top level, high level secrets, and he's basically a spy for the USA, that's so capricious because there was a foreign minister named Qin Gang, and he was supposed to be the heir apparent for Xi Jinping. Well, he was brought down. He disappeared. He just disappeared. And then the rumor came out that he was a spy for the US.
Mm-hmm.
So it's anybody who's on the China beat knows this boilerplate story. They know Xi isn't the most creative guy in the world, and he's just basically rehashing that for Zhang Youxia. So to print that, I think is questionable at best.
So the more likely scenario is this was a coup in motion that was counter couped, as you say, by Xi and his loyalists or his inner Praetorian Guard.
Yeah, and you know, there are rumblings in China that what might happen is unrest in the military and mutiny. I've heard that, and for this might be something to help people in the West understand why a story about the preeminent military leader in the last 40 years in China is being accused of being a U.S. spy. Because the hearts and minds in the PLA are with this guy. They're with Zhang Yuxia. And she knows it.
Right. So, as an expert on the region, and we've been talking about Taiwan, Japan, the first island chain, what's going on with Xi and his threat or his promise to have the PLA ready by 2027 to take Taiwan. So again, uh, I know that it would be very difficult for any expert to predict or track the impacts of what happened over the weekend. But how do you see, the plausibility of a potential mutiny within the PLA, or does that push back any threat to Taiwan? It would seem that China's in disarray right now.
So well, I lived in Hong Kong when the Filipinos took down Marcos. I was in Hong Kong then. And I remembered speaking with people coming to Hong Kong from the Philippines and getting their firsthand accounts of the umbrella revolution. And I bring that up because that is what I have been thinking about as far as China's concerned. The people in China are the ones that could do something. And their lives, as miserable as we've been in North America with the reverse opium war and the Vancouver model and all this unbelievable covert political warfare from Xi's camp, the people in China have had it worse. And I think about a nonviolent uprising that is just undeniable, and I think it might be something that is coming in the near future because Xi's really had a long time to hard bake his bullshit into the CCP and into the Chinese government, and it's obviously not easy for great people to undo that. So it might be up to the people of China. I don't know, but and I don't want to talk about mutiny in the PLA. I mean, people that are really experts in military affairs might address that, but I could see the people in the streets taking matters into their own hands. They did that before in peaceful fashion, I should add.
Yeah, the what was it? The white paper movement is not in too far distant memory, a movement of young people. But I wanted to ask, I know that we've circled around a topic before a few times, but in terms of the plausibility, I think some people will be shaking their heads, and various people will be saying, "Oh, this is now a CIA plot to cast Xi as in trouble," and it really is a corruption case. But I think you and other credible experts, sinologists, have said there actually have been real live prior attempts to take Xi down. Is that right? Can you speak to that at all, just to give people context?
Yeah, I don't have the specifics top of mind, but there have been numerous occasions when she was traveling in the last 5 years that he's had to alter his schedule and strange things have happened, and that his security detail was very seriously concerned. Remember, we spoke about his trip to the U.S. in 2015, visiting Obama, and U.S. intelligence notified the White House, and being the good people they were, they shared it with Xi Jinping, and he went back and took out another dozen people because they were plotting against him. So, yeah, people are not they're not comfortable with Xi. I think they know he's not the most competent, and they also know that he removed, his Yeshi clique removed a lot of competent people to make it possible for Xi to be in power. The list of great leaders is considerable that were investigated and given life sentences, so that Xi was the only option. So, yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, but I hope I did.
You did. I mean, I'll underline that you and others have told me, or I have read that there have been very credible attempts to remove Xi from power, and I think it's important for people around the world to know that. Again, to underscore, Prime Minister Mark Carney engaging in a strategic reset and re-partnership with the regime of Xi, and yet how intelligent is that? Or my own comment here, I'm not asking you. It doesn't seem to be guided by great Canadian foreign policy intelligence to engage with a leader who was facing what we saw over the weekend.
And I
Um,
wrote a and Sam, I wrote a Substack article very critical of the new agreement, Canada China. I thought it was important enough. I went through each of the main 5 points that Carney said they covered, and I kind of criticized each point. What the imbalance really was. But then, I want to mention that I did see Carney talking in Davos. I saw a recording of that. The Canadians have been running around the world. It's not just China. They're running around the world because the threat from Donald Trump has forced them to do that. So I do understand that in some measure the Canadian government is covering their nut.
yeah, as you've said before, the Trump style of negotiation is to get you up in the tree, as you said, see which way you move, and it's not very kind to allies. And you could I wouldn't forgive Mark Carney for strategically partnering with China, but there is the argument that Canada is in a position where it's forced to look for certain other angles. But why don't you we'll end this breaking podcast discussion by, if you're able, could you walk through the points very briefly of your article where Canada's engagement with China would present an unbalance or a problem? And I'll tell you one that I've covered. uh, Gary Clement, a great 50-year veteran of the RCMP who served as a police liaison in Hong Kong, worked with police agencies around the world, mostly our allies, also the Royal Hong Kong Police, and experience with the Chinese police. He said, Canada's police engaging with China's Ministry of Public Security and other agencies is basically a recipe for disaster, because not only, as I've reported, Chris, the story of Justin Trudeau's administration were that Chinese police agents were covertly entering Canada, covertly, in one case, tasked a fake Chinese journalist to spy on, dissidents. They were running their fox hunt operations with the assistance of the RCMP and other police agencies in some cases. Justin Trudeau's government was warned about this by CSIS and yet allowed it to continue. Didn't do anything until my reporting exposed this intelligence, along with Safeguard Defenders. And, I guess I'll end my answer here. It gets worse. It gets into your theory of the Yoshi clique and how Xi Jinping uses organized crime thugs in cities around the world, especially where the Fujian diaspora is, or where the 14K triad and the Hakka networks are very strong. And he tasks those crime bosses to work hand in hand with Chinese police targeting our diasporas. And so back to, my friend, the expert Gary Clement, he said, Canadian police partnering with China will only give China system level understanding of how Canadian police work. And that is handing intelligence on many things to China that it can use against us. So I ticked one off your list, maybe. But if you have any
Well,
thoughts and you want to cover what you thought about the dealings.
there were 5 points in this landmark new agreement. One was renewable energy, and it was basically giving BYD 3% of the Canadian auto market. And I just read the article. I won't criticize that here, but there's serious criticism that should go. I mean, frankly, they're not proven, they're not tested vehicles, but they're getting carte blanche access to a market. By the way, in a climate where there's never been any corporate testing of those vehicles in cold weather situations. So it's just like a nice little bonus. And what is Canada getting in return? Maybe like a wonton wish soup. I don't know. It's not clear. Then you go to the food and agriculture, and then from 2018 on, China has been putting ridiculous tariffs on canola. They were a huge consumer of canola. I can imagine they demanded all of Canadian canola at one time. And now, 2018, a rightful arrest of a Huawei executive, the daughter of the CEO, the complete spy technology company who stole Nortel's IP, and then they're commercializing it. Um, Completely fair arrest, and China gets twisted panties, and they're stopping canola like this.
Mm-hmm.
So they say, well, we'll take off some of that duty, and there's another wonton wish soup that maybe there's going to be more business from China, but they don't. China, Canada doesn't walk away with a guaranteed market entry like they got for the car. So that pissed me off. And then number three is what you and I could have a whole podcast day about the security and safety stuff. And Kearney's saying there's going to be cooperation. Well, if you're going to say that publicly, you better say exactly what the cooperation is. Is the Port of Vancouver all of a sudden going to be given back to Canada? And if it's not, then what the heck are you talking about? So, I mean, you're much better talking about this, and everything that you said from Gary Clement on, I am totally behind you. That's why we talked together. That's
And
what
I
got
missed,
me in the first place.
yeah, I missed one point. Another big point that only I had the capacity to report on because I had a leaked intelligence document is the RCMP was leveraged by China in their fox hunt operations. China wanted to trade off sort of a promise to lower fentanyl vulnerabilities, or basically we'll work with your concern, the RCMP, on fentanyl if you allow our police liaisons to come into XY's city so we can do our fox hunts, right? So it's basically we'll stop killing your citizens. I'm just being a little broad here. If you let us come in and spy on our on your diaspora. So yeah, we could talk. We could talk for hours and hours about that.
But I just want to touch on we're not going to talk about 4 and 5 because 3 is so big for you and I. But I want to say something about, you mentioned Gary Clement, and remember Project Sidewinder. I just want to tell all the listeners that have hung on this long in this podcast that organized crime was leveraged by the Chinese to supply the PLA during the Korean War. And the number one CCP official who managed that was Ye Jianying, Marshal Ye Jianying. And he was the Minister of Defense. And he was Hakka Chinese. And a lot of the organized crime around Hong Kong and Macau is Hakka Chinese. It's just, they become ministers of large government entities, and they become leaders of organized crime. Hakkas are that kind of, and so his sons, 2 sons, one is called the Emperor of the South, and the other one is referred to by the General Secretary as the boss. They decide to weaponize this, and I'm updating all these articles now. They really do. They make the organized crime assets, part and parcel of a plausible deniable government effort to destabilize the West. So that's the origin, and they were tight with Xi Jinping. They kept Xi Jinping in Fujian for most of his career. And when they were done with him, he was on a fast track to become general secretary. That's basically the story in a nutshell.
Right.
And
And to add some names that, people familiar with my book or our conversations and your research at Wide Fountain, Stanley Ho of Hong Kong, Shan Yutan, Broken Tooth Koi, these are names. Some of them aren't with us, some of them are no longer alive, that will be very present in Canadian cities in terms of their current or successor networks. These are the highest level of Chinese organized crime with direct connectivity to China's intelligence services. And these are the stories we've talked a lot about. Why, I say that the US government believes that command of money laundering in the Western Hemisphere is run out of Canadian cities because people like Stanley Ho, his successors, people like the third son we've talked about, Chai Lap-Se and others, their networks are based in Toronto and Vancouver.
And the smuggling king in the 5,000-year history of China is Lai Changxin. And Lai Changxin was the Johnny Appleseed of money laundering in Canada. And it's an incredible story how he got there. And you and I have talked about it. So, we're on the same page, Sam. Totally on the same page. And get rid of this guy. And study up on the Yeshi click. It's worth it for any Westerner.
Yeah, so I'll tell people to end right here. You can go back to probably close to 10 podcasts with myself and Chris from Wide Fountain, where we talk about how we agree on these organized crime figures, including Lai arriving in Vancouver and running operations for China to undermine the West. And so you can just go to our prior podcast to catch up on Chris's deep research. And so, Chris, what will you be looking for in the week coming ahead with this unrolling story in China?
Well, before I say that, you're too modest, Sam. You got to say this. Willful Blindness is your book. Describes the Vancouver model. Anybody who's tuning in wants to get everything between two covers about what China did in Canada. There, it's all there. So Willful Blindness. And I'll just say that I kind of said it. I think it's up to the Chinese people. They have the most to gain from a change. I don't know if it'll happen, but in my gut, that's what I thought as soon as I heard about this reverse coup. My heart goes out to Zhang Yushan and his family. They're good people. He is not a power hungry person. He's not a money hungry person, which she is both of those. So my heart goes out to them and all the people that have been, Catherine Hu and there's a young lady on YouTube, Lei, and Jennifer Zhang. They have been doing excellent reporting on this, and it's my heart goes out to them because they're so vested in this, and I just want to I hope better days are ahead. I've been hoping that for a while now, but I continue to have optimism, cautious optimism for China.